Hey, hi everyone. I'm Ronna Stuller. I'm Secretary of the Green Party of Connecticut. And the idea for this program started a couple months ago when Omar Scott Antar contacted us about some of the campaigns that his organization, the Connecticut Palestine Alliance, was working on, which was a lot of interaction with elected officials, with voters, and with other organizations. And first we thought, 15 minutes slotted a business meeting. And then we decided this subject was big enough, we really needed more. So I'd like to welcome tonight Omar Antar. He's the founder of the Connecticut Palestine Alliance, which is a confederation of Jews, Muslims, Christians, and other citizen groups. It's a 501c3 compliant organization, so it does not endorse candidates. It does not get involved in partisan politics. However, it does engage with elected officials in order to encourage them to sign on to ceasefire letters, to citizens who and town officials who would like to encourage their towns to divest and to support ceasefire, and to interact with our current elected officials for them to sign on to a letter calling for ceasefire and defunding the war effort. So it's my pleasure really to introduce Omar to give us his insights about what's happening right now. And we'll have about 20, 25 minutes of presentation and then plenty of time for questions and answers. So I'm going to hand it over to Omar.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I was honored to be on Rona's New London Greens television public access show several weeks ago now, and we spent a lot of time there at that time to talk about the issue of denuclearization. And so, but one thing that we kind of omitted from that discussion was the issue of how the issue of Palestine relates to the climate crisis, and it's not obvious on its face, but I think the issue of militarism, especially militarism of the United States and Israel, and how they're connected, how that militarism leads to the climate crisis in more ways than one. The very obvious one is the sheer use of fossil fuels by the United States military, and by extension the Israeli military, in all their operations, whether they're at war or not at war. It happens that the biggest institutional greenhouse emitter in the world is the Pentagon, and that's with or without active war. So technically it's not an active war, at least not at the level of Iraq or Afghanistan at the moment. But even despite that, all of its preparations and continued military budget makes it the biggest greenhouse polluter on the planet as an institution, and it usually most of that greenhouse emission comes through the use of fossil fuels to run the planes, tanks, and ships. And it turns out that 80% of the fossil fuel is used for planes or jets. And so to operate our huge Air Force, it consumes and emits, it consumes tons of fossil fuel and emits tons of carbon. But it also contributes to the climate crisis in a less direct way, in that the military posture of the United States that the Pentagon employs, it has a focus around securing fossil fuels around the world. And so that's why there is so much focus on the Middle East, and why the issue of Palestine and Zionism is linked with fossil fuels and oil in general, because the biggest at least easily extractable oil is in the Middle East region, especially in the Persian Gulf. I mean, there are actually other large reserves in Venezuela, but that's a different type of oil. It's more of a heavy oil. But for the easiest and simplest oil to extract out of the ground, the Middle East is kind of, I think, still number one. And so that's why there is an intense focus by the Pentagon and the military planners on the Middle East to control the states that are sit above the fossil fuel that is so precious to the Pentagon and the general U.S. economy that is still centered around fossil fuels. And so Zionism and the issue of Palestine becomes important in that the state of Israel has been called an unsinkable aircraft carrier for the United States. It represents kind of like the policeman, where it acts as a force that acts on behalf of the United States against any Arab states that may act independently, the ways such as Iran attempted to do in 1953. They attempted to nationalize Mossadegh attempted to nationalize the oil from the British Petroleum, and because of that attempted independence in Iran in the 50s, there was a coup that installed the Shah of Iran, and it was motivated in large part by the attempt to maintain control over the oil and the profits for oil. And of course, the choke point of the Strait of Hormuz between the UAE and Iran and the Persian Gulf is still extremely vital, and is why there are, even as we speak, huge naval bases in Bahrain and Air Force Base in Qatar, and of course more bases coming online in Saudi Arabia and UAE. And so the issue of Palestine is linked to all these issues because of Israel's its status as a military enforcer against any independent or states within the Arab and Muslim world. Arab, obviously, in that region, but if you include Iran, you'd have to broaden it to include the general Muslim world, Turkey being to the north as well. And so Israel becomes important as an actor of the United States to maintain the current fossil fuel driven economy and military posture of the United States, and so to maintain that state as unassailable, they have to maintain military dominance, and as well, and as we see now, there is an attempt to engage in a genocide against the people in Gaza, because it also involves the current war also involves the northern end of Israel that abuts Lebanon, and in which Hezbollah has kind of depopulated sections of the very north of Israel because they're in range of the missile fire from Hezbollah, and so Israel is kind of hemmed in on different sides, because also the Houthis in Yemen, they have successfully reduce the shipping traffic to Eilat, or the seaport at the very south of Israel, through its missile fire, and also on attacks on shipping that go through the Red Sea at the strait that's next to Yemen, that go through the Suez Canal. So all these geopolitical issues are quite linked together, and they have, at least in the United States, it's, and especially the Pentagon's planning, it has oil at its center, and obviously the fossil fuel driven economy of both the Pentagon and the general U.S. economy makes it a primary driver of carbon emissions and therefore the current climate crisis. I think it's at this point of the environmental connection and the intersectionality between the environment and the issue of Palestine is not, I don't think gets enough discussion. I mean, obviously, the current, the particularly the current invasion of Rafah, and it kind of in slow stages, or at least not as a full frontal assault as one initially expected. But the assault of Rafah obviously is kind of supposedly a red line, but we'll see. But the issue of Rafah is obviously very important and in front and center. But we also have to be aware of the issue behind all these matters, namely the militarism that's linked with fossil fuels, as well as the nuclear issue that we discussed before. But also I wanted to mention that militarism also has an effect on the American priorities and budget, which leads to, we spend currently per year about $877 billion. That's almost a rough good estimate of, is $1 trillion a year. And that's, about the combined budget of the next 10 countries below us, or about 40% of the entire world's military budget is the American budget of about $1 trillion per year. And so that's a ton of money that at least in my opinion, is wasted on maintaining the current United States supremacy, of which the securing of fossil fuels, I think, is a primary goal, and of which we must mention that the support of Israel becomes very important in that fossil fuel driven motivation, and that's evident maybe now given the fighting in Gaza, but it was also true in the attack on Iraq, and tangentially also on the attack in Afghanistan, because even though the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War did not directly involve Israel per se, Israel and Netanyahu were strong supporters of the attack on Iraq in 2003, because Iraq represented a power that could oppose, and actually did, even in 1991, did attack Israel. And so even though past wars did not have an apparent involvement of Israel, there was an involvement in an indirect way within the American policymakers, and so the issue of Zionism and the neoconservatives, especially back in 2003, and the global war on terror, they are kind of like the thread that connects all these wars, especially since 1967. Prior to then, the issue of the Soviet Union and the proxy conflicts with the Soviet Union, like in Vietnam, may have involved other geopolitical issues, but at least for our current histories, particularly since 2001 and the global war on terror, the issue of Israel and Zionism become very important and integral. And of course, it turns out that the location is obviously in the most oil-rich, or at least the easily accessible oil-rich areas of the world. And so, and one other point is that I wanted to talk about the focus on the military budget as being, it's as an opportunity cost, it crowds out other spending and focus and attention on our social issues here in the United States, and that we don't fund the extreme lavishness that we fund the military. We do not do the same for Medicare or Medicaid. About 15 to 18 million people are in the process of losing their Medicaid right now, basically in April 2024, because of the pandemic regulations, have lapsed, and so there's 15 million at least who may be losing their Medicaid coverage. And this is a wealthy country, as you know, and we can afford universal health care. But it will obviously, if we were ever to implement it, it would force us to shift our priorities. There is actually a paper by the International Policy Institute. Well, I might be getting the name wrong, but anyways, the name of the article that was published in 2020 is How Militarism Fuels the Climate Crisis and Vice Versa. And there's also a paper in 2019 by the Watson Institute of Brown University that that also is a good paper about the costs of war and how it affects the climate crisis. And so there are two pretty significant papers that are kind of recent that can discuss this matter in depth. And one of those papers, it also had a nice description in which they said that they wanted to shift the culture of war to a culture of care. And so right now we have a culture of war, and that is what drives us to pour money into the military, as well as also domestically in the police. But you know, our goal is to shift from a culture of war to a culture of care, that we pour money into either healthcare or rehabilitation or, you know, mental health treatments, and also job training and creation of good paying jobs. And so that's a you know, profound you know, a shift that has yet to take place. And the current war in Gaza is kind of, you know, kind of shows that kind of attitude that every problem has to be treated as a military you know, problem, and that you have a military solution at hand rather than either a diplomatic or a political solution, you know, such as you know, a one-state solution or a two-state solution. I, of course, as an individual favor the one-state solution, but even the two-state solution is kind of like not even on the table, even though you know, if that the two-state solution is a formal American policy, even as we speak, even though in the United Nations recently the United States vetoed a call for recognizing Palestine, which of course obviously would be the second state of the two-state solution. Yeah, so I was able to do some little research about the fossil fuel use of the different you know, military you know, machines that the United States uses. So usually we talk about, we're familiar with the you know, miles per gallon, or that our cards, if you have a hybrid, it's about 35 to 40 miles per gallon. Well, your Humvees of the US military, they only get 4 miles per gallon. If you want to know the mileage of your F-35 jets, it's no longer in miles per gallon, but it's in gallons per mile. So you have to do the reciprocal or invert the units, and it's 2.4 gallons per mile for the F-35 jet. But the one that takes the cake is the Abrams tanks, or the M1 Abrams tanks. That it comes out to about 4 gallons per mile. And so these huge machines just dominate. You know, to just suck up all this fuel that you know, obviously you know, becomes the focus of you know, of military planners. And so you know, obviously the issues of access to oil was a big deal. You know, and that's why there is a you know, a relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia that FDR settled with the King of Saudi Arabia on a ship in the I think in the Red Sea, or one of the extensions of the Red Sea. Is that that's why we have a strategic relationship with Saudi Arabia that is, I think, betrays our so-called you know, support for human rights, which is completely, you know, exposed as complete sham, both for the decades support of Saudi Arabia in its repressive actions internally, as well as in its war in Yemen from 2015, but also for its support for Israel for the decades, particularly since 1967 and its occupation of the Palestinian lands and any future state that supposedly the United States supports. Yeah, so I can go on, or do you have any pointers of what we should focus on, Rona? Oh, you're mute. You're mute.
I guess I had a question listening to you about all the money that's going in to the military, which we know is a polluter, and it's actually worse than a waste of money. But on a state by state level, we're being told that the war economy, the military economy, is what's keeping our local economy going. That's where the fairly well-paying jobs are. That's what housing booms in New London are being built around the electric boat workforce. And I wonder, do you have any thoughts about how we can, I don't know, do detox or withdrawal from the addiction to having a war economy?
Well, I mean, obviously, as the Connecticut Palestine Alliance, our focus is on the political issues that kind of create the need, or the theoretical need for the war and support for Israel and its, as well as Saudi Arabia and in its wars with, whether it's with Yemen or theoretically with Iran in the future. And so, as a political matter, I want to detox the American political landscape of viewing, especially in the Middle East, in terms of my particular focus, to detox the American political culture to view Muslims and Palestinians or Arabs as the other, that are worthy of killing in a war, or that through dialogue and diplomacy, that there is a way to actually reduce the need for any tensions between the various states or quote unquote civilizations. Obviously, that also has to apply to China and Asians, because especially the racism against Vietnamese was very evident in the Vietnam War as well, and of course the same can apply to China and Russia to a lesser degree. Obviously, Russians are white Europeans, but there is a large degree of Russophobia as well, and that which was really at its height also during the Cold War, that justified to a large degree the Cold War buildup. But since 2001 and the global war on terror, at which I believe Palestine is its core, then I think the issue of Palestine is solving Palestine in a diplomatic and educational and political way, I think becomes essential to eliminate one of the biggest need for war. Obviously, on a material level, obviously there is a lot of work to be done in the environmental space, in terms of creating energy sources that do not pollute. They're not fossil fuel based. There is a great deal of work and jobs that can be created for renewable energies. And I don't know if it's controversial in this context, but there's also the issue of nuclear energy. There are technologies like thorium that are that have less radioactive waste, and also are not convertible into nuclear weapons. So obviously the opposition to nuclear energy in the past, I think, was well justified, especially since the conversion of the uranium and plutonium-based energy cycles into nuclear weapons, made them something that should have been avoided, and is probably why the nuclear industry of the United States had a focus on those particular technologies, was because of its adjunct benefit of providing material for nuclear weapons. But if we move away from that particular nuclear technology to other technologies that have less nuclear waste and have no use towards production of nuclear weapons, maybe that would be something. It's a thorium technology. Others have mentioned it in the public spaces, but I don't. That may be a kind of a partial solution to the climate crisis, and also provide jobs and provide away from the fossil fuel focused current economy. Yeah, so
I see Justin has his hand up, so go for it, Justin.
mute.
Hi, Omar. I really want to apologize for being late. I'm in the middle of New York City with logistics driving me crazy here. But I'm so glad I was able to make it. And thank you for being here. And, I'm really glad that you brought up in the context of Israel, Palestine, Gaza, the issue of fossil fuels and the issue of war and wars over fossil fuels, because it's not something that's always brought up in the context of Israel when it's being discussed, but I think it is relevant. And one of the reasons I know it's relevant is because I heard RFK Jr. say very explicitly that, that Israel is our aircraft carrier in the Middle East, just saying explicitly that this is an important region geostrategically because of the oil, and we need to maintain control over the oil. And if our competitors gain control over the oil, that this would be very devastating for the U.S. economy. So really just putting it out there in the open, just saying the quiet part out loud, that there's a geostrategic interest in having Israel. And I assume he knows what he's talking about because he's been an insider, his family has been an insider in American politics for a long time. It kind of, and it makes sense because most of our wars are wars between civilizations who are competing for limited resources, and there are winners and losers, and who has access to the most land, the most resources. It hasn't ever been so that human civilizations compete and fight with one another over what resources are available, over land, because that enriches their civilization. And so what if it's at the expense of the other civilization? We think in terms of our group, our society, not in terms of what's good, for the greater good, and thinking of people all as one. And that's the, tragic history of humanity that we need to move past. And so, yes, when it comes specifically to Israel, I wonder if you have any more insight than I do into kind of the origins. I mean, here we are on Nakba Day, and we know that, there was impetus behind the formation of the State of Israel that had to do with, religious reasons, or the Jewish people being motivated solely by reasons of wanting to have a country, a homeland. But was there also impetus, I don't know the history well enough, of powers, money, people supporting the Zionist effort to form the State of Israel that had oil interests, in their minds when they were thinking, oh yes, that would be a good place to have a country that is allied with the West. Do you know more of the history there than I might?
Yes, so yeah, it is a very interesting history, and I think it largely rests on the British imperial designs at the time, especially in 1917, the Balfour Declaration. So Lord Balfour, he actually, there's some really interesting history, and it revolves around World War I. So around 1917 is when Great Britain and France and was involved in World War I against Germany and Austria, and Russia was kind of like at the hinge point, because that's obviously when the Russian Revolution occurred. But so Russia was the weaker party of the British and French alliance, and kind of it was like Germany sought to kind of move Russia off of the chessboard and make them withdraw from the war, so that's why actually Germany, in their secret intelligence, they supported shipping Lenin from Germany and Berlin, I think, to Russia. But the point being that Balfour actually wanted to appeal to the Russian Jewry, and there was a strong Zionist movement within Russia. And so Balfour's thinking in supporting the state of Israel was really, at the time, was his trying to attempt to appease the new Russian, rulers after or around the Communist Revolution of 1917, so he thought, if you look at the history, he was turned out to be very anti-Semitic, in that he thinks that it's a matter of transaction. So if I give them this, they'll stay in the war against Germany, and so he thought that was some way of appeasing and being on the good side and maintaining the relationship with Russia and keeping them in the war against Germany at the time. And so there was a strong military reason why the British supported and they had occupied the area of Palestine at that time, and they took it from the Ottomans. And that's all the story of Lawrence of Arabia, rebelling, of getting Arabs to rebel against the Ottoman Empire. So that was one reason, was to have Russia stay in the war against Germany. The other reason is the British geopolitical designs, in that the Suez Canal was obviously extremely important to Europe and Great Britain, in that it's a connection between Mediterranean and India, which was their jewel of the British Empire at the time. And so the issue of having another unsinkable aircraft carrier right next to the Suez Canal was extremely important. So the issue of oil may not have been as prominent, especially in 1917. It may have been more prominent in the 1930s when there was more discovery. I don't know if it was at that time in 1917 that oil was discovered, but I think the first real discoveries of oil in the region was actually in Iran, and that's why I mentioned the overthrow of Mossadegh and installation of the Shah in the 1950s. That's because there was a British petroleum was well established in Iran, because in parts of Iran, especially near the Persian Gulf, I think oil sometimes it just comes out of the ground naturally, or at least back then. And so it was a very easy discovery of oil in Persia, at least initially. But then later, I think, especially the Americans, they're the ones who did the exploration around Saudi Arabia and found oil in Saudi Arabia. But if you remove the boundaries, the Persian Gulf area in general is where all the hydrocarbons is, or oil or natural gas, and it's also on the eastern side of Saudi Arabia. It's not on the western where the Red Sea and the Suez Canal is, but it's on the eastern side. And it turns out that that's where the Shia populations are, whether that's the Shia of Iran or the Shia of Saudi Arabia, which are a minority, and they're extremely oppressed. And we think of a national security state in the United States. It's nothing as compared to what happens in Saudi Arabia. But to answer your question, it was more of a geopolitical machinations of Great Britain with Russia and with the Suez Canal, and I think oil became a later issue at that point.
Well, I know Richard has a question, but could I ask a quick follow-up question? I was thinking also more about the events of 1948 when the British Mandate of Palestine expired, and they were going to leave, and they really kind of left a power vacuum in their wake, and they left, my reading of the history is that they left the factions there to fight it out and to establish who was going to have power there. They really didn't leave a successor in place when they left, when their mandate expired, but there was, but the Zionist forces had a lot of support. And I'm wondering if those forces, the ones who kind of wanted to support the formation of the State of Israel in 1948, if the powers that supported that event and the Nakba and the expulsion and the establishment of that state by violence, if that was something that was supported perhaps with similar geopolitical motivations, if that's clear.
Yeah, yeah. Um, uh, well, my understanding of the history is that especially around the early so to go back to the British, so even before 1948, the British, especially in the 1930s, they're the ones that they had a governor there because obviously they occupied the land from the Ottoman Empire up until 48, as you mentioned. But the governor there and the administration, the British administration, they were openly Zionist, like the individual governor was Zionist, and he permitted a lot of immigration, and they were obviously feeding and supporting the Zionist forces, even like paramilitary forces at the time, and so they kind of set the stage so that in 1948, when the British left, that the Zionist forces had a lot of the military backing at that time, and they could effectively take over the country. And there was also talk that there was connections with the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, and that kind of the occupation of Israel all the way up to the western Jerusalem was it was kind of like a backroom deal with the kingdom of Jordan, and that they would occupy the West Bank, and that they would permit the Israelis to go all the way up to West Jerusalem. And so this myth of the hard fought war to gain independence is not 100% accurate, in that it was kind of like a done deal at the start, and that there was no real like military clash that had to be overcome with great difficulty, especially when it involves Jordan. And so there was a great deal of ethnic cleansing, and therefore refugees were created in the land that would later become occupied in 1967. But the geopolitical situation in 48 was different from currently or since 1967, in that the Soviet Union actually had strong relationships, and the Eastern Bloc, especially the Eastern communist countries, had a great deal of support for Israel. And because you had it at that time, the Labor Party was very dominant and had a very socialist pedigree and outlook, and actually they implemented it to some degree in the kibbutz and different the ways Israel ran its country, and so there was a lot of so I guess the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc found a lot of I guess they viewed Israel to some degree as an outpost of their communist ideology to some degree. I don't know, to what degree they considered it successful or not, but that certainly changed since 1967.
Well, that's interesting. Thank you.
And Richard, thanks for waiting. You had a question.
Yeah, no, just since we started talking about Gaza, so I've heard elsewhere that oil has been discovered off the coast of Gaza, and so I'm wondering what if that's an additional factor in motivating Israel and in turn the United States. And then I've even heard speculation that this pier and this this sea-borne route for supposedly supplying aid to Gaza could be related to this in some way.
Yes, there actually is already, as we speak, platforms to extract hydrocarbons. I don't know if it's oil or natural gas that Israel already established in the Mediterranean Sea, and they were even threatened by Hezbollah by drones, whether they're air-based or sea-based drones, I don't know. But so there is, as you mentioned, there is already extraction of fossil fuels off the coast of Israel, and I think you are correct in that it also includes areas that would be technically under Palestinian or Gaza control if it actually were to become a state. So that is a potential source of income that would be lost if Israel had to accede to or accept a Palestinian state in Gaza. And so there are kind of like two important, kind of larger geopolitical assets or prizes that Israel, could be motivated to or could motivate the current war in Gaza. One is, of course, as you mentioned, that oil or hydrocarbons off of Gaza, but two is kind of like a secondary Suez Canal, and that there was a long talk about creating a Suez, like a second Suez Canal from the Red Sea port of Eilat to the closest point would be to Gaza, or through one point out of Gaza. And so both as a logistics matter to create a secondary Suez Canal that they would control, as well as the hydrocarbons wealth, those are two strong motivators for Israel to maintain control over Gaza. And the third one is what Jared Kushner mentioned, seaside resorts and apartment buildings that he wants to create by first flattening Gaza, as they seem to be doing now with their bombing.
Does anyone else have a question? If you don't, I have a couple of things that you inspired me to think about. One, I think the blockade of Gaza, which many people don't know, has been in existence for, I don't know, a decade, is related to offshore reserves of hydrocarbons. And I think when you look at the map, people would assume, oh, Gaza is on the coast, but Gaza has not been able to use its coastline for a very long time. And the one other thing, when you talked about the proxy conflict, I was privileged to be asked to talk to a high school history class about the Middle East. And I look back, and you can look back 3,000 years, and every empire in Europe, Asia, and Africa wanted that strip of land where Palestine is. Going back to the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Ottomans, wherever. It's always been a very strategic piece of land. And I don't think the people who actually live there have had autonomy in millennia, except for very short periods of time. So when you talk about the proxy wars, I also was in Israel for the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago, and lived on a kibbutz just south of the Lebanese border. And if a plane went overhead, you didn't think, oh, is that an Israeli plane or is it a Jordanian plane? Is it a MiG or is it a Phantom? So even at that time, when we weren't evacuated, as people who live there now have been for months, we had the sense that it was just the superpowers fighting over us, and it wasn't really any of the people on the ground. Let's see, it's about 10 of. Are there any other remaining questions, statements? If not, I think it might be a good idea to, if you could talk a little bit about your organization and what it's doing and how people can support it, and also some upcoming events that, it would be great to have crowds participating in.
Yes, so our organization, Connecticut Palestine Alliance, our kind of main focus is interaction with elected officials, the media, and the general public, obviously around the issue of Palestine. And so we have a few initiatives, one of which is the Palestine voter pledge. And so we're trying to create a database upon which we can do statistical analysis of voters in the state of Connecticut in particular, and who by their own admission or their own statements are, say that they're motivated to vote in favor of justice on Palestine. And if we do statistical analysis of those people who sign up in that voter pledge, we can have sort of like a currency to interact with the elected officials and say, if you do X for Palestine, these voters will come out for you. But if you maintain your current status of voting against the peace and justice in Palestine, they will vote against you. And so we have a link up on our website there. The other issue is we're asking all local officials to sign a ceasefire letter. And I think we're honored to have Douglas Larry is one of our co-signatures. So we're really proud and thank him for that. It was like a derivative of an effort that was one of our proudest accomplishments, is that we got the Connecticut General Assembly to write a ceasefire letter. So this ceasefire letter, obviously, it's a political statement. It's not legislation or anything in that sense, but it's addressed to President Biden and the two senators, Murphy and Blumenthal, to obviously call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. And so the idea is to provide that political pressure, which he is, with some degree, he is feeling it and acting. It's kind of symbolic at the moment. It's like, temporary slow walking some weapons. That's the best we got so far. But we obviously have to go further. But we had 11.5% of the Connecticut Democratic state primary voted uncommitted. There was other states, and Abandoned Biden is also a group that we started in Minnesota, I believe. And Michigan obviously is very famous and is kind of crucial because it's obviously a swing state that he won last time, that if he loses this time would be really detrimental, especially since the recent polling says that the Sun Belt is kind of really lost. And so he has to hold on to the Rust Belt, which is Michigan, really with dear life. There is also a website to build that political pressure through signing on, elected officials to sign on to the ceasefire letter. And we have two towns, and there's also what we call a website. A section of our website is for about town resolution. So two towns in the state of Connecticut voted for ceasefire resolution, namely Bridgeport, the first, and then Windsor. But I'm intimately aware of all the tricks and traps, basically delays that have kind of stymied the passage of ceasefire resolutions elsewhere. Like New Haven had a big Zoom meeting, and they filed it, or in Hamden they put it in recess. And so there's a lot of delaying tactics that we could see everywhere. It's kind of my job is to monitor and help push these people along and facilitate it. There was like a good number that supported ceasefire in Danbury, but it just wasn't enough. So we need to work on 3 more people in Danbury. So another issue is that I'm interacting with the Connecticut General Assembly on hopefully starting the process on legislation on two topics. One is divestment. And so we're really good to work with John Fussell, a retired labor lawyer, who actually worked in 1981 on the divestment of the state of Connecticut from the apartheid state of South Africa in 1981. And so thank God we have him. He's working to help us to do exactly the same thing for the apartheid state of Israel. And it's obviously a much longer process, and it's much more difficult than in 1981. But we're starting slow, and we have an entry or a connection with some of the Connecticut General Assembly persons as we speak. The other issue with the Connecticut General Assembly is the issue of police reaction to the campus protests. And so obviously there are 2 different issues with the oppression of the student protesters. One is academic/disciplinary, and the other is police abuse. And we had Gary Winfield. He's the co-chair of the Judiciary Committee. So we want to interact with him on the police issue. And the other issue is the Higher Education Appropriation Committee. If you threaten the money of UConn, especially, I don't know how much state money Yale gets, but at least the state budget on UConn is really dependent. If we can interact with those people who give the money to UConn on relieving the academic/disciplinary actions against those protesters, if we can help provide relief in that end, that's be very good. And so the issue on the police end is that we kind of our initial idea was just to do something simple, which is just to ask for information, to see what actions against Palestine, or if we can make it more generalized, what actions our police are doing with surveillance or arrests or abuse against people who who protest on issues of Palestine or other controversial political matters that we see are creating abridgments of First Amendment rights. Obviously, the Palestine issue is the biggest and most prominent one, but you can, if you wanted to include Republicans who are, who feel put upon by the national security state, we can include them as well. But historically, obviously, the Palestine issue is kind of like the biggest at the moment. And then the final one, which is most prominent coming up soon, is next week. One week from now and a day, Thursday, there's a Walk for Gaza, and it has 3 parts. Thursday, the 23rd, is in New Haven. It starts at New Haven Green at 10 a.m. And then it goes to about, it has a route that's on the website. Yeah, I'm actually trying to establish the website, secondary website, so that it's an easy one. It would be, the future one would be palestinect.com/walk. So it's that it just says placeholder at the moment, but if you go to palestinect.com/walk, that hopefully we'll have that up tonight. But that one's the Thursday. New Haven is a New Haven section, and that goes. The general idea is the walk encompasses 25 miles, which is the length of Gaza, and so we split it to 3 parts. New Haven starts from New Haven Green at 10 a.m. and it goes through to the New Haven Hospital at 20 York Street. But also, I think, Beneke and then St. Rayfields, and I'm missing a few, but it eventually ends up around 2:30 to 3 p.m. At City Hall. The second day is Friday, the 24th, and that's in Bridgeport, and it starts at the Bridgeport Islamic Community Center. That's 703 State Street. It's kind of like 0.7 miles from the Metro North station. So if you don't have a car, go Metro North. You have to walk up State Street, which is perpendicular to Water Street, where the Metro North is. That's where that's the main mosque there. It looks like a church because it used to be a church, but that one goes. Yes, the 2 Friday and Thursday and Friday, New Haven and Bridgeport. They have a stop in front of Deloro's in New Haven, Deloro's offices, and Representative Himes in Bridgeport. And in Bridgeport, that will also eventually end up at the Seaside Park, the beach. In the evening. So that one starts at 1 o'clock is the Friday prayers and Bridgeport. If you don't want to stay for the prayers, the march actually starts at 2 p.m. And then the main event is with coordination with Veterans for Peace, and Rona may know more details, but that's the Saturday, the 25th, and that's on the shoreline. And I think it goes from Guilford to Hammonasset Park, and that's more scenic route, and maybe Rona can take the ball from there.
I actually don't know that piece as well, but for those of us in Eastern Connecticut, on the 21st and 22nd, there are some events starting on Tuesday morning, I believe at Courtney's office. Walkers will go to the sub-base, and there is an evening program at All Souls UU in New London on Tuesday, the 21st in the evening. And then Wednesday, the 22nd, is the Coast Guard Academy graduation. And between about 8:30 and 10:30, every year, our group that is supportive of the U.S. supporting the prohibition of nuclear weapons demonstrates on the lawn near the Coast Guard Academy entrance. So we expect a lot of different groups to converge there. And what I can do is send out to everyone who is in on this Zoom call what we know about the schedules in each of those different spots. But it's 1 minute till. Justin, do you want 2 minutes at the end?
I think Mary Lou has,
What?
Oh yeah, Mary Lou has her hand up.
Oh, Mary.
Yeah, just a quick comment, just to thank Omar for being here and to say you're preaching to the choir. We're all, on board with everything you said. Many of us are members of the Connecticut Peace and Peace and Solidarity Coalition, Veterans for Peace. So we're getting notifications of different activities going on. We're attending the rallies in different parts of the state. I actually was over in front of Russell's office when John Fussell and others organized a rally there for asking him to divest Connecticut pension funds. And when I asked for follow-up information on that, I was told that it was a complicated situation, that funds are mixed together with other funds, but that some particular bonds had come, Israeli bonds had come to the maturity date, and he did decide not to renew them. So I thought that was, probably due to some of the pressure that was being put on him. And John does great work in that area. So I'm happy to be in your company today, and just know that we are behind you and we will be present whenever we can.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, Stan Heller is actually, I was active in that, that divestment meeting with Russell. That was work that was done even before October 7th. We're working on the Connecticut General Assembly side. Obviously, that's a slower process, and I think you're correct in that that at least the passive action, it wasn't actively removing investments, but not renewing investments in Israeli bonds is what occurred. It's hard to get them to actively divest, which is what we really want to do. And it's not, and their excuses are not exactly true that it's hard. They're actually, Stan provided me some information of a whole list of both bonds, which are straight purchasing of Israeli government, as also as Israeli companies that are invested into by the state of Connecticut. There's a whole list of an Excel file that I can share that Stan was able to obtain. So there is a technical way of obtaining, teasing out the different investments the state of Connecticut is engaged in that we need to divest from, obviously.
Thank you. Justin, do you want to talk for just a minute or two about our petition drive? We're not really, our goal isn't really to tell people how to vote, but we want not to for voters to have choices, especially if they're not going to be voting for, candidates who are against ceasefire, who want to keep sending arms into the region. So maybe a 1-minute pitch.
Sure. Well, yes, I would maybe disagree with you slightly. I think we do tell people who we want them to vote for because our party has endorsed Jill Stein. We had a presidential preference primary, and our members awarded all 9 of our delegates to the Green Party convention for Jill Stein, who I am also working for. And I think we've seen a colossal failure of leadership from the president all the way down, and a complete abdication of responsibility towards, for example, enforcing the Leahy Act, where we should not be giving money to nation states that are committing human rights abuses, such as Israel has been doing with an ongoing collective punishment of the people of Gaza, including withholding of food and water and medicine. And there's a famine in Gaza. So we have, our idea in the Green Party is that, we demand better, we will vote for better, we insist on better, and to us that is Jill Stein, and for president. And of course, voters can vote however they want, of course, but that's our recommendation. And because there will be no change in outcome if we don't change leaders. I applaud the efforts to try and influence leaders, and that can be effective. And I really appreciate what you're doing with trying to get amnesty for the students, because these students have been so mistreated, and it's just been just miserable to see them have their administrations call the cops on their own students and threaten their careers and their safety, and for wanting to peacefully protest against what they see as a moral abomination, and then to be mischaracterized as anti-Semitic, even by the president himself and by the entire Congress, basically, to say that, that criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic. It's complete nonsense. It's complete nonsense, and it's really offensive, and it really needs to be called out. And to hear that coming from the president on down, and and who has lifted a finger in the U.S. Congress, really? I mean, there have been some complaints. There have been some noises made by some of our representatives, and some people have been very outspoken, even in our Congress, but we don't have a representative Congress, and our two-party system will never be a representative system. We only are going to have a representative democracy when we escape the two-party system, and that's what we're trying to do in the Green Party. We're trying to bring about a multi-party democracy with ranked choice voting, and we're walking the walk of being a non-corrupt party. We don't accept PAC donations, because at the root of a lot of what the problems with our government is the influence of money in our politics. So we are petitioning to try and get Jill Stein on the ballot, and myself running for Senate against Chris Murphy. We have until the end of July to get 7,500 valid signatures. Right now I'm in New York because Jill has a May 28th deadline to get on the ballot in New York. So it's all hands on deck for the Jill Stein campaign right now in New York. And a very onerous 45,000 signatures required in New York State. Cuomo tripled it from 15,000. Obviously, they don't want us on the ballot because I guess they're afraid that people might like us and want to vote for us. So heaven forbid that we should actually be on the ballot or anything like that. No, I mean, it's really an offense to the voters and to democracy that they have tripled that requirement and shortened the time span to 6 weeks. The May 28th deadline is brand new. It used to be a much later in the summer deadline for New York, and they really shortened it to try and make it as difficult as possible because they don't want competition. They're afraid people might like us if we were on the ballot. So what can I say? We are fighting to try and put better leadership in government, more moral leadership in government, leaders that have a sense of right and wrong. I mean, the bar is low at this point. Our leaders are abysmal. And so, that's what gets me out of bed to keep fighting every day for this party. And, I read the news from Gaza every day, and a lot of mornings I just weep because I see what's happening, and I know the injustice of it, and I know that it is not even going to it's not going to bring peace, that this military operation is not going to bring peace. It's just going to bring perpetuation of the same fundamental conflict that will go unresolved until there's justice and the right of self-determination for all people in the region. And the Green Party calls for a one-state solution. And if we had more time, I wish we could talk more about how we could get there. But that's a complicated issue. Probably we have to save for another time.
We might have a second session that's focused a little differently. Well, thank you, Justin. Thank you so much, Omar, for visiting us online from Florida. And for anyone who's in attendance, this will be posted on YouTube, and we'll have a follow-up email with links to information that's been given. So with that, good night.